disc profiling and unlocking the people puzzle for project professionals. I'm delighted that Nigel Smith can join us this evening to take us through this great exercise and share more. I'm your host for this evening. I'm Robert Allen. I'm the APM Branches Manager. So we would like to know who's in the room. Where are you joining us this evening? It'd be great if you could answer this question on menti.com 362.
I was just going to say, looking at Ballack near Loch Lomond, I'm planning to do the North Coast 500 route at the end of checking on the route yesterday. It was quite interesting.
Over 50%. Let's learn a little bit more about our guest this evening.
Don't be shy.
I'll just give a little intro for Nigel. So Nigel is the agility coach for project professionals. Nigel's passionate about serving and empowering project managers to become more effective with project working relationships, more confident in their communication styles, and more complete with their process competencies. And he's also great at looking at soft skills with hard outcomes. Now,
9 very simple questions in there, which I'm interested in understanding from you what your highest score on that graph is, because that will demonstrate your more dominant disc profile, which we're going to use as I go through this evening's presentation. So as you do that, I just want to cover a bit of an agenda. Rob's given me a really great introduction, and thank you for that. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to find out what your disc style is, or your dominant disc style. And before I dive into the detail of what disc is really all about, I do want to go on a bit of a history lesson and just tell you where it all came from and where it originated from. We will then go into each of the 4 styles at very extreme. Hopefully you'll recognize some of them from either work or home life. Towards towards the end, we'll take a moment for some reflective practice, just to review what you've learned during the course of this evening. And then, of course, at the end, there will be some time and opportunity for questions, and Rob is kindly marshalling those for me this evening. So please keep them coming in through the question box on GoToWebinar. Also important to point out that for those of you that are logged into Mentimeter, we will be having a competition as well. We're going to have a short quiz as we go through, just to bring it to life a bit, just to make it a little bit more fun. So please pay attention, excuse me, and listen, because of course some of the answers will be based on what it is I'm having to say. So first and foremost, I'd just like to share with you a golden rule, which is certainly a rule that's for a majority of my life I've lived by the code, because treat others how you want to be treated is certainly a mantra that's, I believe, for genuine mutual respect is the way everybody wants to behave. But what I'd like to do now is just to check your understanding of this, and if you could just please use Mentimeter 36 and 2, and just to say, do you agree that you or not? And I'm doing a massive proponent, so no over 40 last question. How about the platinum rule rather than the golden rule? So somebody's very ingeniously found the bottom right hand referred to as the veto territory. So 85% of you believe the rest of this webinar for the next 40 minutes to try and just give you some idea of the reasons why that may be the case. I know for a fact that if the planet was covered in people, so we need to get doing things the way they want to the world of. A moment ago, for those of you that have that's absolutely the file in hand, tab 3, you will see your highest outlier, and that's the column that I'm interested in for this evening. Now, for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to have done that, I'm just going to ask 2 simple questions with regard to, and I just want you to, if you're reserved and task focused, and if you are outgoing and people focused, you're going to be an I, and reserved and people focused, you're going to be an S. Just repeat those one more time. So outgoing focus plus task is a D, outgoing focus plus people is an I, reserved plus people is S, and reserved plus task is style C. So if you could just please now into Menti, just input tend to be more of the D, persuasion, sales tend to be more of the I, support of the S. If you do score the same, I mean, typically most people's profile will be slightly different, but just choose one off. And for the purpose of what we're going through this evening, it's not going to make too much difference. As I'll come to, we are actually all a blend. None of us is totally dominant in all of these cases all of the time. So thank you for that. I just want to known as the polygraph test or the lie detector. But most interestingly, during his lifetime, Marston was also convinced that women were far more honest and far more reliable than men, and could work faster and more reliably. And as such, during that time, he championed the cause of women and is credited for creating the DC comic superhero Wonder Woman. So that's just a bit of a history lesson around the whole area of DISC as we have it today. But before I do, it's wise of me just to list. There is no right or wrong. You're not being put in a box, and none of this defines any of you at all. And for the purpose of this high-level dive, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk at the extreme ends in order to bring some colour to the sort of styles, traits and characteristics that you may notice in yourself and in other people, so that I can more readily bring them to life for you. What I'm offering is a taste of to whet your appetite, because typically this level of detail can take many days to go through. So let's start with the Ds then. Here's a summary of all 4 types. I'm hoping that you'll recognise some of the styles in here already. But the Ds, they're the commanders. You may have heard the term, just do it, okay? And because they're outgoing and task focused, they prefer to cut to the chase, get to the point and move really, really fast. Success for them is getting results. And in relationships, the people element can often fall by the wayside at the expense of getting jobs done. And certainly my experience in the project world, I've come across plenty of individuals of that nature. And of course, there is always a need at certain points in certain parts of a project for that style of approach. Then you've got the Is, the outgoing and people-focused individuals. And because they're more outgoing and people-focused, they can often get more distracted and are often very optimistic. And in relationships, the task elements can always fall by the wayside at the expense of having a bit of fun or adventure. And this can come across as not taking things too seriously. And jobs can get started and not completed, and can cause frustration for other styles within DISC. Then you have S's, the reserved people, if you like. And these guys do not necessarily need to feel the center of attention. They often seek support to others to provide stability. You could describe these guys as being stable and predictable. And in relationships, they may not instantly say what's on their mind, and they may harbour feelings and have the odd explosion at some point down the road, whereas typically D's or I's would actually sort of explode at various times. So S is far more reserved. Now S's will also try and seek a win-win where they can, but also they will step in if they feel a vulnerable person or a family member is being unfairly attacked. And do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Moving on to C's, critical thinkers. And because these guys are reserved and task focused, they can become across as a little bit clinical, aloof, standoffish where other people are concerned. They like to reflect and consider, and like S's, they move at a much slower pace than D's and I's, often at an irksome way to D's and I's who want to move at a much faster pace. But C's are all about quality, they're all about process, they're all about getting things right. These guys would rather be right rather than happy most of the time. And as well, C's can often become frustrated with others if they do not match their expectations, and other people get frustrated with them if they're overly picky and critical. But these guys are your project documenters. They're your grammarians and your spell checkers. There's always a need in a project for that. So again, just to put another summary picture in there, above the line into the outgoing, more extrovert tendencies, we're talking about fast pace, big picture, more verbal, less written. Below the line for the C's and S's, it's a much slower pace. It's about getting things right. It's about doing the detail. And then to the left-hand side, you have the task focus. It's about getting the job done. And then the people focus, where it's more about feelings and emotions. So what I'd like to do at this point is just to start the Menti quiz this evening. So I'll just give you a few moments to jump in online. You get the opportunity in anyway, so please hang on to that. So if we're ready to go, so we need to start just now. See how that plays out. Go into a little bit more deep. And I just want to say at this point, Drive, they're all about delegation. They're decisive and they're demanding. They're the doers, they're the disruptors. Incredibly competitive. They're into headlines and not storylines. It's sort of come to me with a solution rather, not a problem. So again, that might sound familiar to some of the styles that you've been working with on your projects. And actually, deep breaths, these, because you might not like this. So, and ask questions like Margaret Thatcher. Sylvester a little bit more smug now. But what is it that makes is courageous, taken advantage? But what is their value in that? And to get things done. And this one's all about some D characteristics. Okay, excellent. 2 math 4 do exactly the same process and talk about the eyes, and don't we all know it? The glass is always half. Eyes are also very impulsive, impressionable, inspirational, highly interactive and interesting. But they can become irksome and irritating on occasion at extremes. We've got there the example of Will Smith. You could have many celebrities tend to fall into the eye camp. So you've got people like game show host Graham Norton, where more times than not, it's more about him than it is his guests. And these guys get all of their energy from people rather than from the task. And they can be very playful. They like fun, they like adventure, but they can become easily distracted, meaning that typically they will procrastinate a lot. They'll start lots of things and probably finish none of them. And again, you're probably starting to see and recognize some of the traits which may cause problems and conflict with other of the styles of DISC, particularly the C's and the D's, where it's more about the job than the relationship. And as well as there's a secret agent here as well, but it's more like Austin Powers than James Bond, and international man of mystery. Clearly very positive, optimistic, charming, but also an element of being slightly undisciplined. So what is it about eyes? Extreme eyes, they're all about popularity, they're about fun, they're about popularity, and it's the order of the day. And the more public their recognition is, the better for these guys, extroverts out there. In terms of their greatest fear, well, clearly it's that polar opposite of popularity. They're likely to take that quite personally. So in that sense, start to recognize some of the signals when these people lose some of their energy. Again, you can see many parallels to this, particularly in the world of showbiz. But what is their method of control? Well, in a project and actually in an organization, these guys can be your secret persuaders. These are the guys that are going to get people on board. These are the guys that are going to be saying, you can do it. The eyes will get everyone involved. These guys have got great value in an organization of getting people on board. And if you've got big change programs or any form of business transformation, these are the guys you want to get wound up first to get the whole of the organization or project to move with you. And again, it comes as no surprise, times not caring about the task in hand, particularly for D's and C's. Back to our quiz. So what's an I style sometimes limited by? the right answer. Being in taking part in that. I now want to move on. It's all about or Mother Teresa, Gandhi, or even team players, paced and patient. And out of all of the 4 styles, they make the best listeners because they reflect and have much slower pace. They'll tend to internalize and not verbalize too many things. So when you look at the people side of the DISC spectrum, you've got the high I's where you can hardly get a word in because they're always very talkative and verbal. With an S style, you'd be lucky to get a word out. So you need to have patience when dealing with the S style. And typically in a business change program, the S's are the most difficult group of people to convince of the change. They're going to need time to adjust. They're going to need more consultation than anybody else in the process. But let's just take a look at what their fuel is. I've touched on it already. It's all about harmony and security. If these guys were a car, they would be like a people carrier. So you get everybody on board. It would be the safest car there, full of seat belts, airbags, and all the rest of it. They pretty much can be self-sacrificial at times as well. So they'll always support the underdog, and it's all about they're in it together. Okay, so that sort of community. So of course, their fears, if harmony and security is what fuels them, then pretty much it's the polar opposites again. So any threat of loss of security is a big deal for an extreme S, as indeed is change, pretty much typified by no change please, unless they're involved in that process and unless they've got that time to adjust to it. Being on the introvert spectrum or more reflective, these guys take a lot more time to be convinced. Their method of control, it is to slow things down, but it's at reliability and predictability, and they work at a pace which is much slower than D's or I's would expect. Finish. The S's will absolutely finish the work that they're set out to do. And their value to an organization, well, pretty much these guys are the diplomats. Okay, they're the team players. They get things done through teams of people and individuals to get working together. It's difficult to get them to express their view, so you do contribution they're going to mention. And just on to our quiz question about S. Interesting. Well, the concentrate on task is more of a C trait that we'll come on to in a moment. S's don't really like making decisions, so they're not really going to weigh up the pros and cons. What they want is for people to make decisions for them, which is where the D style would actually help an S style to say, this is what you need to work on, off you go. And of course, S's don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be seen as unpopular. So they're going to need to lean on other people that will do that for them. But again, thanks everyone for taking part in that question. And then just finally to finish off, the leaderboard. Let's see what's happening here then. I think Steve D there. So it's all there. It just covers the, but again, just if you like, squaring the circle on this, so I just want to cover off the C style, which is the reserved and task-orientated individual. Now, as I mentioned before, C's, they're all about accuracy. They are both your quality control and your quality assurance of your project. They will make sure that the work is done properly. Doing things right and being efficient is the order of the day. And C's are often cautious, competent, consistent, and compliant. And C's will often go by the book, but they can also suffer from paralysis from analysis because they like, a little bit like S's, to take their time, which again for D's and I's is probably not that acceptable. But actually C's, you're in some great company because we've got guys like Jobs, any of the major pioneers like Bill Gates, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, even Einstein. Irrespective of what you think about these guys, their attention to detail, their quality and their determination to do things right is absolutely unprecedented. And again, from the world of film or TV? What about this guy, Sherlock Holmes? And perfect doesn't exist. So and organized, detail orientated, and very, very analytical. These guys are going to make sure, as I said before, that the work that you do in your project is done right. These are the people that are going to get upset if you try and cut corners or do things incorrectly. Okay, and so what is the greatest fuel? Well, as I've covered, it's all about attention to detail. It's about the quality and precision. And as I mentioned before, these guys at the extreme end will choose being right over being happy. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, where you've got your high eyes, pretty much they will choose being happy all day long. So you can start to see where some of these conflicts. He really fears, well, it is criticism and all these bits wrong, or it's just a fleeting glance and, you know, not really giving them the time of day. If you're going to criticize C, you need to have the evidence to back it up, because that's what they're going to be expecting, that's what they're going to ask for. And C's typically won't invite conflict. S's, because they're more introvert and reserved, they're probably going to harbour their feelings rather than verbalize it. And also in sort of concert, actually like the written word over long verbal exchanges. So when you write to a C, give them all the details they will need. And again, you can start to see some of the differences in the communication styles between each of these four types, because not all of them are going to want to be written to with chapter and verse on what's going on. So also a lesson for a C, when they're communicating in written form to a D, go for the headlines, not the storylines, because the Ds are just not going to be interested in reading that. So the value to an organisation or around your project, see, it's all about quality and precision. So what does a C style prioritize? Yeah, excellent there. So it's all about style traits and the taking action, most definitely from a D. But of course, as I mentioned at the start, none of us are extremes all of the time in this. And although we just did I think somebody pointed out earlier on that their graph had got 2 bars at the same height. We are in fact all a mix of all of these different styles, and we will sort of flex these at different times and environments, and there's other factors that influence how it all comes together. But if you're a high D to start with, but actually you've got some S and some I, a bit like taking a black coffee or taking it with sugar and milk, you can start to see how actually the D traits start to become less severe, and there's more of a people focus, certainly with the S and the I in there. So as I mentioned at the start, I was just talking extremes just to bring the whole of the characteristics to life, but you know, in the main we're all a balance, but we do have more dominant traits than others. And as I mentioned and touched on already, you know, you do get variations and conflicts in all of these particular styles, and certainly projects, you know, when they're under the hammer or they need to get things done pretty quick and there's times of real critical nature, then very often the people side of a project can start to fall apart. But arguably that's the side that really needs the most attention, because it's people that deliver projects, and ignoring that will get you, you know, not the desired outcome that you're actually looking for. So when on occasion you might see a C as maybe calculating and condescending because they're going for accuracy and quality, the C's will see the I's as just impulsive and irritating and not really worried about the task in hand. And very often when an I is in full verbal mode, you know, most people just want to cut to the chase, including the D, and you might just want to say to them, look, you know, great story, but what happened at the end? You know, just cut to the chase, basically, because they'll just talk for England or any other national team, as it were. And D's will often see S's as too slow and steady. And conversely, S's will see extreme D's as too domineering and too demanding. And as I mentioned earlier, with extreme D's, any of the other 3 styles can afford to be quite blunt with a D, because that's exactly the style they respect. One thing we haven't sort of touched on at the moment is what happens when you get two Ds together, for example, because they don't like failure, but they do like competition. Well, typically, if you've got two Ds working together, you can actually get positive conflict, and both of those people will probably overachieve because they're driving each other, but equally they won't want to be taken advantage of by the other. So all the same rules are still at play. And just generally speaking, again on the S side, now we're in sort of lockdown, pandemic, COVID time, and we're all online, virtual meetings. In the world of Zoom, the S's typically, it might have changed because I know some of the social norms have changed over the last few months, but S's, possibly C's in particular, would be the guys that would join the webinar right at the last minute, right on the hour, just before it starts, and they're more likely to be camera off and audio off because they don't want to be, you know, in the spotlight. They don't want to engage in small talk before the meeting starts, and that's again more of the introversion perspective. Typically, if you were to walk into a room of people, you would spot D's and I's quite readily. These are the guys that are going to be more verbal and more verbose. Probably even you could spot an I by the way they dress. Typically very fashionable. It's all about look at me type thing. And D's, you'll find these people probably charging around or just talking very short summary sentences. C's and S's, more likely to be the people that aren't doing much talking or socializing, either online or in a room full of people. But these are natural things that you can start to recognize and see. And the other thing, you know, particularly now we're talking about these type of individuals in the furlough world that we're in at the moment. You know, if you want to get furloughed staff back to work, do not tell an S on a Friday you want them back in the office on Monday. You're going to need to give them a lot more time to prepare and get used to the idea than just a weekend. They'll spend the weekend just worrying about it. But for a D, for example, bring it on. You know, they'll start Friday afternoon. That's how extreme some of these can actually get. And, you know, as we've done this evening, you can use the DISC profiles, and there's an even deeper profile that I'll tell you about in a moment, which talks about how you behave not only in the work world, but also at home and also under pressure, to see how your D, I, S, and C flexes. But other ways of really finding out is just to be curious around people, you know, just ask them questions, ask them about their work and what excites them or interests them. And you can often tend to say, yeah, actually, they're more of a C or more of an S. And once you start to understand how they work best and you start to gravitate towards how they work best, they're more likely to give you what you need to get your project done. So just on to, I think, the penultimate question of our quiz this evening. So just what do you think my style is? That's really quite interesting, because I actually am quite a high C. Most of my formative years before I became a qualified project manager was spent in the automotive industry last century. Very, very task orientated, blame culture, command and control style organizations where the people element was often forgotten. And it's only been in most recent years that I've tried to develop my relationship skills, almost akin, if you like, to the agile project manager, where relationship and team empowerment and liberation is far more prevalent in terms of getting things done in the modern age. But I'm glad to see there's some people that thought I was more on the people side of the spectrum there, so that's really encouraging. I did set a personal goal a couple of years ago to become less C and more I, so thanks for everyone to do that. It's useful research for myself. And let's just see where we're at the moment. Okay, so it looks like it's going to swap around a little bit here. Okay, so Dragonite is in the lead. I can say that I've got some prizes on offer for the top 3 slots this evening, so there's still things to win for Chris, Susan and Reese as we head towards our final question. And this one should separate out and make it a little bit more of a level playing field. So 5 frogs are sitting on a log. 4 decide to jump off, how many are left? Okay, interesting. The answer actually is 5. And this is almost like a metaphor for life in a lot of ways. Just because you decide to do something doesn't mean you've actually done it. It's actually the action to do something that that makes things happen. So a little bit of a riddle there, but it is absolutely true. It's all about action rather than decision. But well done to the 5 people that got that correct. And again, let's just see what's happened to the leaderboard. It looks like Steve D. Okay, so pulled it out at the last minute. So well done, Steve. And if you could just send something in chat to Rob, that would be really great. And can I also ask Dragonite and Alison to do the same? And I'll just now cover out what it is you guys have won. So thanks everyone, by the way, for taking part. I trust that you've learned something through the questions. It was really just to inject a bit of interactivity, energy and fun into this evening's proceedings. But what I would like to say is that for Steve, not only will the disc profile is done this evening, I'll give him more of a detailed run through of what his graph suggests from a work perspective, but I'd also like to invite him to a deep dive coaching session. So as Rob pointed out at the start of the session, I'm actually an agile project management coach, and a big part of that is around the coaching discipline. And what I'd like to do, Steve, is just introduce you to the world of coaching, work on a goal or an ambition or an aspiration that is important for yourself, and also for Dragonite and Alison, exactly the same thing in terms of the coaching experience. I'm sure we'll touch on DISC a little bit. I'd have to say probably all the top 3 places probably get the same thing, but you know, so well done on that. And what I would say is that each of those coaching experiences is going to take at least a couple of hours to do, so I'm prepared to invest quite a bit of my own time into helping you to achieve any goals that you set out to do. So well done to you guys. If you can put into chat to Rob, I'll pick up with you separately outside of this. And thanks also to everyone else for taking part in the quiz this evening. I did say I'd touch on the full disc profile. So what we actually did was a bit of a snapshot of just looking at what your public or work persona was. If you want to take the full disc profile, it asks 3 times as many questions. It's quite spooky in the way that it sort of calculates what you can be like in a perceived home fashion, what you like at home, and also how you behave, what your characteristics and traits are when you're under pressure. Okay, so, and it's interesting to understand how, for example, your D style will operate between home and work mode. And where you see the biggest variations on graph is where you see that people have to modify to manage their behavior quite wildly between the 3 distinct modes. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that if you've got 3 graphs which are exactly the same, then by far and away you're quite a genuine person in that sense, because you're completely authentic from home life to work life to how you behave under pressure. But those graphs are very unusual because, as I mentioned at the start of this webinar, very often we have to change our styles to almost mask what other people want, a bit like a chameleon, if you like, so that we can get what we need to get done as project managers. So I hope that makes sense. If anyone's interested in going deeper with this, then please, you can reach out with me at the end of the session. And this is just a bit of research I'm doing on styles and approaches, because typically it would suggest if you are on the task side, you have a preference for a different style of phone to those on the people side. I'm not sure it's playing out the way I wanted it to, in a sense, but I guess I should have asked the question if maybe not all of you bought your phones if they're provided by work, but if you had a choice, what would you go for? And it looks as though it's pretty even across the park, really. What I was expecting to see, that all the Android devices would be the domain of the Ds and the Cs, and maybe the I's and the S's would prefer Apple. Because I did have a follow-up question to this, which I'm not going to ask, but of those people that have got Apple phones, how many of your screens are broken? But that's a question I didn't put in actually. But thanks again just for that little bit of fun just there. I'd just like to recap on the journey we've been on and on the styles. So the D, which is for outgoing and task, is all about getting the job done. Think Trump, think James Bond. I's, you are the cheerleaders of the organization. You're the ones that ramp up all the support. You're the secret persuaders. You're the people that are inspirational, imaginative, and infectious across the organization. S's, we're now moved into the more reserved part of the DISC profile. These are, again, people focused, but whereas the I's are more about themselves, the S's, it's about them and everyone else. They're the carers. They're we can do it. They're the ones that actually will make the change happen in your organization if you bring them on that journey earlier rather than later. One of the things I didn't mention about S's is they can at times have a tendency to be stubborn and passive aggressive, and sometimes that can lend itself to outbursts of emotional emotional outbursts. So just something to be aware of and take notice of, but that's in extreme circumstances, and carefully managed you can actually navigate S's through change, but just give them time and notice. The C's then, the critical thinkers. These are the quality control, the police of your project or your organization. They're all about getting the job done right, okay? They don't like things being rushed. They don't like things being done wrong. And as I mentioned earlier, they also don't like to be criticized unless you've got a lot of evidence to back it up. So I'm trusting that the key takeaways that we've covered this evening is all about raising self-awareness. So you've seen in yourself from the profile you've done possibly some of the traits and characteristics that you recognize in yourself and maybe that other people recognize in you. But equally, it's about recognizing these styles in others that work around you. I know it's a little difficult in the virtual arena when we haven't necessarily met all the people, but certainly from office environments where you see the more direct interactions, you can see how people behave and how they get on. And really, thirdly, the one thing that I hope I've managed to impart to you this evening is now you recognize yourself a bit more and also the actions and behaviors of others. There's really a chance and opportunity to modify, to manage your approach, to meet that other person. And that could be in just the way that you engage them and speak to them, or even pause and listen to them, or even how you write messages to them, you know, the short emails or the long detailed emails. It's knowing who you're dealing with. And of course, we all know in the project management community that it's absolutely the responsibility of the sender of the information to make sure that the recipient has not only received the communication, but has also understood it as well. And that pervades all four of those particular styles. But each of those four styles, of course, has their own unique way of doing that. And what I'm trying to propose this evening is that if you do it in a style that the person you're communicating with understands and accepts, you've got a far better chance of getting what you want for the benefit of yourselves and the projects, a true win-win, if you like. So I did start the webinar with the question, which I think was a resounding 85% in favour of treat others the way you would like to be treated. And I'm just proposing through this that actually, if you just try and treat others how they want to be treated, you might find you get some slightly different and more beneficial results. And of course, armed with all of that information, you then can make a choice. And again, it comes back to those 5 frogs sitting on a log, essentially, in that once you're armed with knowing more about yourself and about the other person, you can choose whether you cross that bridge, go halfway, or don't go anywhere at all. But the key thing, and certainly the message I want to get through from this evening's webinar, is really all around your self-awareness and knowing what it is you can do. And the modifications you might need to make personally could be just as simple as speeding up or slowing down. It works both sides of the spectrum. It might be about focusing more on the facts, on logic, or on feelings and fun. And what I hope I've given you this evening is to say that DISC can actually help you build a relationship bridge, you know, like the one on the graphic here. And as I've said, you then get the choice to see whether you want to walk across it or not. And just as we finish out the session this evening, just like you to spend a few moments just to reflect on what you think from the session we've had, what you'll stop doing, maybe something you'll start doing, something you'll continue doing, or maybe something that you'll do differently. And as I mentioned before on these slides, all the input you put in will be recorded as part of the PDF deck for the actual presentation slides, which I'll give to Rob at the end of the session. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to put some more input to those in. Okay, so different things are going to do things with different people, really. Okay, so we've got everything ranging from really doing absolutely nothing. So that may be someone that's actually got a handle on all of this already, or thinking about the different ways to communicate. Yeah, because the art of human social relationships is all about communication at the end of the day. Great. So just moving on from that then, just in terms of how we as the APM did this evening in terms of the event itself, if you could just do a bit of input please for the registration process and how the event was managed and how I performed for you this evening as a speaker. Thank you. Just leave it up for a few more seconds if there's anyone else that needs to put anything in there. Just conscious of time, I am going to finish at 8, so I'll just move forward to the next slide. And this is really for the benefit of Rob and the guys at the APM. If you just want to take the opportunity of just dropping in some topics or ideas of subjects that you'd like to see covered by Rob and his team over the coming weeks and months. And value management, be it on risk, governance, change. Yeah, I did mention to Rob earlier that I am working on one for the PMI all around conflict and also for presentation and in particular delivering webinars. So we've got some really great subjects coming through there. I'm sure that will give Rob something to try and line up some really great speakers for. Just conscious that it's coming now to the hour. I think just need to cover off. So these are just my contact details, by the way. So if people want to reach out with regard to sample DISC profile or the full profile, then please you can contact me here. And again, this will be part of the PDF that gets sent out to you. And here's just some upcoming APM webinars that Rob's got planned over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I know the one on mastering speaking and presentation skills, I think Rob's been done by Andrew Payne, who's an excellent speaker. I think he's a TEDx speaker. I know he did an event at the PMI that went down really well. But it looks like you got a great catalogue of events there. And also, one thing I didn't mention at the start, I'm actually from the dark side in an event, sorry, from that point of view, in that I actually do this sort of thing for the PMI here in the UK. And I just wanted to share with you that we've also got some webinars running throughout September. And again, we've got, well, there's one on the 1st of October, but they're all free to attend. Just need registration at pmi.org.uk/events/webinars. Any APM member is welcome, as indeed is any non-APM member, and indeed any non-PMI member. So again, that will be in the pack if you're interested. We're doing a similar amount of webinars across the month that APM are doing, and it just gives a different perspective to what we're all doing in effect, which is really raising the profile and best practice of actually the project management profession. And I think with that, I think that's my last slide there, Rob. So if I can just hand back to you. Apologies, I've gone over by a couple of minutes, but I'm more than happy to take any questions that any of the guys have got.
Excellent, thank you, Nigel, and thank you for taking the time to share. We've had some lovely comments come in. Andrew has said, many thanks for the webinar, very useful. Ashok liked your comment about being from the dark side, but very grateful for you to share. So one of the questions was from Ram, who said, how do you not upset a D? I don't know if Ram's got someone in mind, but how does Ram keep on the good side of a D?
Very, very hard. Very, very hard. Very often Ds will get frustrated because they'll want to move at 100 miles an hour. They won't want detail. If you go to them with big long reports, they're just not going to read it. They want solutions and not problems. Very often, I think Ds have their place at times of crisis. And I often think of people like Churchill, for example, certainly through the last war. He was a man of his time for that particular situation. You could also argue about Boris and Trump for what we're going through with COVID right now, where at times it needed that sort of push and urgency. But generally speaking, that style of command and control is slowly being outmoded, although it is sort of industry specific. I mentioned earlier that I came from quite a task-orientated automotive background, and it seemed to pervade and work particularly well there. But very often I think D is probably the most difficult style to try and contend with. Even I's would have a bit of a problem with these at times. But I am talking extremes here, and very often if you can go to, well, treat a D like a D. So for example, it's about stepping up and stepping out and actually pushing back to the same level of fervour that they're giving to you. So that can also help. They'll actually give you respect for actually doing that. I remember a couple of years ago, I was dealing with my boss, who was a high D, and I was getting really frustrated because I was in the detail level, and I just exploded with a load of expletives. And he looked at me and said, that's the sort of passion I want. So sometimes it's what they want to hear, because it's sort of giving them, the sort of fuel that they want as well. It brings that competitive angle in, but you've got to know that person particularly well. But I do think it's probably one of the most difficult styles to try and sort of modify your own approach to manage in that respect.
Oh, great. So
I'm not sure if I answered Ram's question, but it is a deep one, to be honest, Rob.
We'll wish Ram well. And yeah, I know Ram. So Ram, if you need any help, let me know.
I think I do too. Yeah.
we can merge some questions together here. I've seen Farhan and Kerrit has asked, do we need to stay in one style, or can we change depending on the situation to adapt to ensure that we're working well?
I would say play to your strengths. And the one thing I did mention at the start, you got the D's that set the vision, the direction. You'll get the I's that will get people on board. You'll get the S's that will make sure the work's done, and the C's will make sure the work's done correctly. So we don't want people playing out of position. We just need people to be show empathy and awareness around the other styles around them, because of course in projects, as indeed in organisations, diversity is highly desirable. But at times, of course, we mentioned about D's just now, where the pressure is really on, that tends to be the time where the people element gets forgotten. And I think this is particularly just something that D's and C's need to be mindful of. It's not all about the task. It's important, yes it is, but fundamentally projects get delivered by people. And at times, I's, I know we didn't have many I's on the call from the graph we had at the start, but they probably need to take it a little bit more seriously and just focus in on the job in hand, as well as sort of maintaining that level of interaction, because human relationship and communication is absolutely vital and absolutely key. But I wouldn't expect people to be playing out of position. It's more about recognizing the styles around you and adapting to their style for what you need for your element of the project is really part of the key message we go here. But wherever you can, diversity in a team is absolutely welcome. A project team full of D's is as bad as a project team full of I's S's or C's. They'll all go off in different directions and probably fail. It's that sort of mixture that will bring it all together and make it a lot more successful.
Excellent. Following on from that, Reese has just asked a great question. Does a person's profile change with age? I.e., as you get older and wiser, do you get a bit more critical thinking, or are you set for life, as it were?
Well, it's an interesting question. As I mentioned earlier, Rob, in the full disc profile, there are 3 graphs. One is at your home, one is at work, and one is how you are under stress. And typically your home graph, when you look in the mirror at home and how you behave at home, is the one that's most unlikely to change over the course of your life. Having said that, where you do get significant life events, and you might consider the black swan event of COVID to be quite life-changing for a lot of people, there is a chance that it would change. Where you've got loss or grief, those familiar with the Kubler-Ross change cycle, where you go all the way from denial through to depression, through to change. If you get significant life events where you've lost people in your family, or you've been made redundant, or some other life-changing moment, then yes, it can change. The one that changes most often is probably your work profile, because to the most part, we're all chameleons at work, because none of us walk into a job knowing exactly what it is we should be doing or how we should behave. And very often we tend to mold that job world to our own style. But of course, as I mentioned before, you might have to flex your D or your I at times, depending on what it is you're doing. And on the disc graphs, depending on where your 4 points are, can give trends as to whether or not you're trying to be all things to all men, or you're unsure about what job you should really be in. But as I mentioned earlier, if you do get correlation between the 3 graphs and they're identical, you're pretty much doing the job that you were born to do, and it becomes more of a passion and a hobby rather than a vocation or something you really have to do because you have to. But typically your work graph would change the most if you are or have moved jobs over the course of your career. Now, of course, when I started my career, jobs for life were quite prevalent. These days you can have 3 or 4 careers, and I'm sure with the next Gen Z or wherever it is, they might have even more than that. But generally speaking, what I would recommend, if you're interested in the deep profile, I would probably get one done every 3 or 4 years, or if there's been significant change. All what I'm talking about here is very similar to what people might understand with Myers-Briggs on the MB type indicator, or maybe insights or SDI, strength deployment index. They all do much of a muchness, just from a slightly different angle, but a lot of them talk about the sort of the emotional people feeling side and the task orientation, as well as introversion and extroversion.
Excellent, thank you, Nigel. I think you've also included a question from David in that answer, who said why DISC as opposed to other profiling tools.
I'm not advocating that DISC is the best thing. Personally, for me and my journey, I did it a few years back, and it made me, or it raised my self-awareness to a level where I started to understand myself a lot better and people around me. I got trained and certified in it. It's just the one that I carry around, but absolutely there are other ones which are equally as valuable and give tremendous insights and awareness to people in the jobs they do and how they act and behave in front of people. The one thing I like about DISC is that what I'm trusting and hoping through this evening's session is that not only did people get a really quick, broad brush picture of themselves and manage to relate quite a few things to their traits and their styles and their characteristics, but I'm sort of hoping and trusting it was reasonably accurate as well. And that's the frightening thing about DISC. From 9 questions, you can get quite a detailed picture. From 27 questions, you can get a frightening picture. And I think for me, Rob, it's all about that raised awareness. How well do you want to understand yourself so you can start becoming a better project manager to you and those around you?
Excellent. I think I'll end on this question from Edward, who that kind of ties in. He said, if your scores are balanced, does that mean you require the full assessment to bring a dominant character out? And I'll just add on to that, or are you able to be a couple of categories, as it were?
It's unusual, but of course, the exception proves the rule. I wouldn't worry about it too much. We've just taken a very broad brush approach tonight, with just 9 questions in that regard. if you want to talk to me in a bit more detail about how the full profile would work, I'm more than happy to do that. I wouldn't read too much into it or get too concerned or worried about it. It may be the situation you're in at the moment, or the environment might also be affecting the way you do the results. As you can imagine, across just 9 questions, as the permutations of outputs is phenomenal, as indeed it is across 27 questions. I wouldn't necessarily say that like I did say before, these profiles don't define you. They don't put you in boxes. It's not a test. It doesn't define you at all. I wouldn't worry about it too much. In effect, it means you're quite balanced across all of the 4 areas, and you might be more attuned. I noticed that on one of the inputs coming back on one of the final questions, that someone was going to do absolutely nothing, and that may be because they've got a grip on this already, and that's how they behave and act within their environment. So nothing what I've shared has been that revolutionary to them. And of course, there are lots of DISC practitioners out there. There's a lot of intuitive people out there that know what works for them in life and at work, but I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I think on that note, we've got no additional questions. I'd like to say thank you for giving up your time this evening and guiding us through this, but also putting people on the spot and doing a bit of a quiz as well, which was great to see. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
I'd also like to say thank you for everyone who had joined us this evening. I'd just like to apologise if some people saw some inappropriate language throughout that. I noticed one little comment popped up. I apologise on behalf of that person. If that person's got any comments, please make contact with me and I'll happily have a chat with them. But for everyone else, thank you.
Yes.
And we look forward to seeing you at many, many more webinars in the future. Keep well, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your interaction and input tonight. Hope you learned something, and see you next time. Take care.
Excellent. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.